Who is Jack the Ripper? The name alone conjures images of foggy London streets and a sinister figure lurking in the shadows. It's a name that has echoed through history, igniting curiosity and speculation for over a century. But who is this notorious killer who evaded capture, and why does his story continue to grip our imagination even today? Stick around, and we'll peel back the layers of this chilling mystery, taking you through the eerie streets of Victorian London and exploring the theories and revelations surrounding the identity of one of history's most infamous criminals. Imagine waking up in the late 1800s in London, a bustling metropolis, yet, beneath its surface, a dark underbelly thrived. The streets of Whitechapel were filled with hope and despair, laughter and fear. It was here that the peace would be shattered in the fall of 1888 by a series of gruesome murders that would leave the city gripped in terror. The victims? Women, marginalized women, often forced into lives of poverty, struggling to survive in a city that seemed to have forgotten them. The killer's identity remained elusive, sending shockwaves throughout society at a time when such violence against women was rarely acknowledged. You might be wondering, what made Jack the Ripper so different from other killers? Why does his name still resonate with such intensity? Perhaps it's his striking ability to evade the authorities time and time again, leaving behind only riddles wrapped in blood and mystery. Or could it be the tantalizing clues and chilling letters signed by the Ripper himself, which fed the public's fervor for answers, yet offered none? The chilling reality is that the man responsible for these heinous acts was never apprehended, and as we delve deeper into this case, we start to unravel why he has captivated our collective imagination for over a century. As we journey into the heart of Whitechapel, one fact stands out: the 5 canonical victims, Marian Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, each had their own story and heart-wrenching fate. Take Marian Nichols, for instance. She was found on the morning of August 31, 1888, with her throat slashed and her body mutilated in a manner that shocked the police and public alike. Each murder was more gruesome than the last, and yet, amidst the horror, a darker aspect emerged. Despite the police's best efforts, each time the killer slipped through their fingers, deepening the enigma. But what might have driven such a person to commit these barbarous acts? Some speculate about madness, others evoke the specter of class warfare, or even a more sinister, calculated motive. Society viewed the victims with a mix of horror and disdain, reflecting a deep-rooted sexism in Victorian culture. The fact that these women were seen not as victims, but as mere statistics, only added to the mystery surrounding the killer's identity. Why target women from such a low social standing? What message was he trying to send? As the police dissected the crime scenes, they were met with baffling clues. Each location seemed carefully selected, as if the Ripper was playing a macabre game with his pursuers. Ripperologists have long pored over the murders, attempting to connect the dots. Here's a surprising revelation: while many of the murder sites were close to one another, they also appeared to reflect the killer's intimate knowledge of the streets. Could it be that Jack the Ripper was not just a brutal murderer but a clever manipulator, using fear to evade capture? The thought is chilling. Now, let's pause for a moment and consider something. How did this killer, whomever he was, manage to shroud himself in mystery, eluding not just the London Metropolitan Police, but also the sharp eyes of a public desperate for justice? One chilling facet of this story is that the Ripper's reign of terror ended almost as abruptly as it began. After the murder of Mary Jane Kelly in November 1888, the killing stopped. Was this merely a coincidence, or did the Ripper have a plan, a motive for suddenly ceasing his gruesome play? Could he have moved to another city, or even taken his life, leaving behind only whispers of his existence? As police hunted for their elusive quarry, they faced a media frenzy that intertwined fact and fiction, blurring the lines of reality. Every detail, from the brutal nature of the murders to the eerie letters allegedly sent by the Ripper himself, set the stage for speculation and intrigue. Some of the most famous letters, like the one signed Jack the Ripper, teased the police and the public, claiming responsibility and taunting their efforts. Were these genuine cries of a madman, or clever hoaxes designed to stir the public's imagination further? Notably, one described the killer almost playfully, "I'm not a madman, but a master of my trade." What's fascinating is how, over time, the letters began to weave a narrative that elevated the Ripper to a near-mythical status. In Victorian society, with its fascination for the macabre, could it be that the very fascination with serial killers had begun? As fear permeated the streets of London, the public became both captivated and horrified, devouring sensationalist tales printed in the newspapers. But who were the suspects? This is where the plot thickens. There was no shortage of individuals flagged as possible candidates for the title of Jack the Ripper, leading us to an unexpected twist. The case was full of conjecture. From local butchers to respected professionals, each suspect came with their own narrative, adding further layers of complexity to the mystery. Some theories even implicated individuals with notable connections to the Crown, highlighting the rampant speculation that surrounded the case. Consider Montague John Druitt, a barrister who drowned himself shortly after the last murder, his mental instability bringing suspicion. Or Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant with a history of mental illness who was both a suspect and later committed to an asylum. Then there's a name that sends chills down any historian's spine. Walter Sickert, a well-known artist, became an intriguing figure in the later analyses of the case. Many believe his art reflected the horrors of the murders, suggesting that he was perhaps even inspired, or implicated, in them. Each suspect brought with them a story that, while compelling, only added to the mystery rather than resolving it. You might be wondering, were any of these men truly Jack the Ripper? Or is it possible that we've placed our fictions and fears onto characters merely because they were notable enough to be scrutinized? The truth is, we may never find out who Jack the Ripper was, but the quest for answers has spurred countless theories and imaginations for years. But there's more. As we peel back the layers, we can't overlook the social conditions of the time. Victorian England was a society riddled with class divides, gender inequality, and urban despair. It was a world where women often fell victim to the relentless grasp of poverty and necessity, and where the working class lived in abject conditions. Why then, did the Ripper choose these particular women? Here's something you might not expect: the victims seemed to embody the harsh realities of life on the streets. The sudden visibility of their murders ignited conversations around the treatment of vulnerable women. In a sense, Jack the Ripper forced society to confront its own reflections in the dark. And yet, as society grappled with these uncomfortable truths, the true identity of the Ripper remained frustratingly out of reach. Each year that passed saw new interest in the case, with amateur sleuths and professionals alike emerging from the shadows, each with their own theories. This narrative is fueled by the idea that we've constructed the myth of Jack the Ripper, much like a gruesome fairy tale that elicits both fear and fascination. Our obsession transformed him from a fearsome predator into a sort of anti-hero, adding to the legend that he is today. In recent years, advances in forensic science have reignited interest in solving the cold case. But even the introduction of DNA doesn't guarantee a resolution. Indeed, could there be a chance that we have romanticized this figure so deeply that the very act of naming him robs us of the story's impact? Or perhaps, in our search for answers, we're merely uncovering layers upon layers of a story that is both tragic and hauntingly beautiful, the lost tales of the women who paid the ultimate price. Now, as we draw closer to our conclusion, consider this: the story of Jack the Ripper is less a mystery of one man and more a reflection of society's darker themes. The phenomenon of serial killers would not remain confined to the streets of Whitechapel but echoed throughout history, casting shadows that loom large to this day. The yearning for resolution is instinctual, yet the answer remains tantalizingly out of reach. One emotional takeaway is this: perhaps Jack the Ripper is not just a name tethered to fear but serves as a grim reminder of how society can fail its most vulnerable, turning them into mere footnotes in the annals of history. Much like the Ripper himself, society has evaded the responsibility to confront the underlying issues that created the very conditions for such violence. So who is Jack the Ripper? While we may never know his identity, the reverberations of his acts continue to culminate in our cultural understanding of violence, gender, and societal neglect. Ultimately, the darkness of his legacy presses us to explore the human condition with a critical lens, urging us to peel back the layers of history and understand where we've been and where we might be going. Thus, the legend of Jack the Ripper serves not only as a chilling echo of the past but a challenge for our future, to seek justice for those who have been lost and to ensure that their stories are never forgotten. As we end this exploration, we leave you with this final thought: sometimes, the monsters that we seek are not just those hidden in the shadows, but the social constructs that breed them. So, what will you do with this knowledge? How will you confront the stories of the forgotten? What comes next might just leave you speechless.